What if America's closest allies aren't really acting as allies anymore? What if they're acting more like employees? That may sound like an outrageous claim, but a recent report involving Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has sparked exactly that kind of conversation. According to reports, Trump personally intervened during a tense moment in the Middle East and urged Netanyahu not to retaliate against Iran. On the surface, that sounds like diplomacy. After all, world leaders call each other all the time. They negotiate, persuade, and try to influence decisions. But some observers believe something much bigger is happening beneath the surface. Because this isn't just about one phone call, it's about a pattern. For decades, America's alliances were presented as partnerships between sovereign nations. Countries cooperated because their interests aligned. They disagreed, negotiated, compromised, and occasionally argued. But increasingly, critics say the dynamic appears to be changing. Instead of asking what America's allies want, people are beginning to ask a different question. What does Trump want? Think about that for a moment. When tensions rise in the Middle East, when trade disputes erupt, when military operations are being considered, or when diplomatic agreements are negotiated, one name somehow keeps finding its way back into the center of the conversation: Donald Trump. Supporters see this as proof of leadership. They argue that strong leaders shape events rather than simply reacting to them. In their view, if Trump can convince an ally to avoid a military escalation, that's not a problem. That's exactly what a powerful leader is supposed to do. But critics see something very different. They see a growing concentration of influence unlike anything modern politics was designed to accommodate. Because power doesn't always come from official authority. Sometimes power comes from expectations. People begin anticipating what a powerful individual wants before that individual even speaks. They adjust their behavior, they change their plans, they make decisions with one eye constantly looking toward the reaction of someone else. And that's where this story becomes fascinating. Nobody is claiming Trump literally controls foreign governments. There is no evidence of that. But perception can sometimes be just as important as reality. If world leaders believe they need Trump's approval before making major decisions, then his influence extends far beyond the powers listed in any constitution. And that's what has some political analysts paying close attention, because influence and control can often look remarkably similar from the outside. Imagine you're a leader facing a major crisis. You have advisors, intelligence reports, military officials, and diplomatic channels all feeding you information. But you also know that one phone call from Washington could dramatically affect your political future, your military support, your economic relationships, or your standing on the world stage. Would you really ignore that phone call? Probably not. And that's exactly why influence matters. The most powerful people don't always need to give orders. Sometimes they don't need to say much at all. The mere expectation of their reaction is enough. This latest situation is particularly interesting because of the stakes involved. Trump has invested significant political capital into negotiations involving Iran. A large military escalation in the region could complicate those efforts and potentially undermine broader diplomatic goals. So when reports emerged that Israel might be considering further action, Trump reportedly moved quickly. Shortly afterward, tensions appeared to cool. Was it diplomacy? Was it strategic leadership? Or was it evidence of a much larger shift in how global power actually operates? That's the question many people are asking. Because the traditional image of power is simple. Governments make decisions, institutions create policy, systems provide checks and balances, leaders come and go, but the institutions remain. Yet the modern political landscape increasingly tells a different story. A story driven by personalities. A story where individual influence can sometimes outweigh formal authority. A story where a single person can become so central to international affairs that governments begin organizing themselves around that person's expectations. And whether you admire Trump or oppose him, it's difficult to deny that he occupies a unique position in global politics. Few modern politicians generate the same level of attention. Few can influence financial markets with a statement. Few can dominate headlines across multiple continents with a single comment. And few can make international leaders immediately reconsider their next move. That's why this story matters. Not because of a single phone call, not because of a disagreement, but because it raises a much larger question about how power works in the 21st century. Where does influence end and control begin? At what point does persuasion become dependency? And what happens when entire governments start making decisions based on the expected reaction of one individual? Maybe this is simply diplomacy at work, maybe it's evidence of exceptionally effective leadership, or maybe we're witnessing the emergence of a new kind of political power. A system where official titles matter less than personal influence, a system where the most powerful person in the room doesn't need to issue commands because everyone already knows what he wants. And if that's true, then the real story isn't about Trump and Netanyahu. The real story is how one individual may be reshaping the behavior of governments around the world without ever needing to formally control them. Because the highest form of power isn't forcing people to obey, it's creating a world where they choose to obey before you even ask. And that possibility may be far more significant than any phone call ever could be.